Okay, I'm live. I tried to I did like a schedule for later, and it was like said it was waiting for me. Anyways, I'm assuming why it sounds good. Everything. This is going to be short. Hopefully, maybe not. Basically, this entire series of the what I call it, what grinds my gears about learning, is uh venue for me to kind of vent about issues I have with our public understanding, social understanding of learning that always come up while I am trying to fix the problems that occur because of the misguidedness of our public and social understanding of learning. So the problems they're always in the back of my mind because I've experienced them so much. But then this is a way for me to flesh out precisely what it is about them that I don't like. And then when the time comes, I just reveal them here. I'm really hoping it sounds fine. So we'll see. Yeah, I see green dots on my microphone, so I'm assuming it's working. So this one's called our brains are not processors. And so this kind of started so right now I am engaged in the education of people in two ways professionally. And by education of people, I mean I help people learn. And one way is I teach English at a university here in Japan. And the other way is I am trying to create a learning app. So particularly to learn a second language. So the specific thing that I help people learn is the English language, but what I am doing is learning in general. I'm engaged in helping people learn. So there is no distinction for me between learning a language and learning anything else. Name it. You fill in the blank. To me, it's the exact same thing because I see the content as one categorically different thing from the process of learning. So the process of learning is the same thing regardless to what it is you're learning. So right there, I'm drawing a fundamental divide between the public and social understanding of learning and myself. Because the public or social, from now on, I'm just going to say our socially understood, agreed upon definition of learning allows us to believe that, say, if I'm going to learn how to become an astrophysicist, that's different from, say, if I'm going to learn how to speak German. My argument is it's not. The content that composes the German language and the content that composes astrophysiology is different, but the process of learning is exactly the same. And so I am oriented in the process of learning. And this is the funny thing is a lot of people will find it really hard to disagree with me on the outset. So if I were to ask you directly, do you think the process of learning astrophysiology and the process of learning German is different? Some of you may say yes, some of you may say no. Those of you that say no, so those of you that say yes, I guarantee as the discussion starts to progress, you're going to lose your ground. You're going to be like, well, I don't know exactly how it's different. Because what you will try to do to describe to me how it's different is you will find yourself describing more and more how astrophysiology in German, the content is different and less about the process of learning. And those of you that say yes, no, it's not different. As I again try to ask, as I try to ask you, okay, how are they the same? You will find it more and more difficult to describe to me how they are the same because you will find yourself describing how astrophysiology, the content, in German language, the content are the same, and you can't do that because they're not the same. My argument is that we view our understanding of learning is grounded in the content that we're learning, not in the process of learning. So what we take for granted as learning is not learning. It's simply you're observing the individual bits and pieces of the thing you're learning. You're not observing the process. We are quite detached consciously. Our perspective and our awareness is quite detached from the process, as it should be. The problem with that, though, is as an adult, when you're trying to then learn something new, if you're consciously detached from the process of learning and all you can see is the content, what will likely happen is your strategies for learning will be misguided, because you will then focus only on the content and not on the process. What happens when all you're doing is focusing on the content and not the process is certain things become, you start to believe certain things are more important than others. Certain actions are more important than others. If all you can see is one thing, then certain actions regarding that thing will become like the only thing you can see. So for example, if content is the only thing you can see, then actions like memorizing, drills, listening for long periods of time, consuming, in other words, the key word I want to say here is consumption of that new material becomes the most important thing to you. If all you can see is the content. Well, if you're oriented toward the process of learning, then you will see that the consumption of new material may be a part of the process, but it's just one part of the process. While there's other things you must do alongside the consumption of new material for learning to exist. Because that's what a process is. A process is inherently a series of actions done in a specific order. And so that's all I see. Well, the majority of us only see the content. And so when you're only looking at one part, which is essentially one part of the process. So if all you're doing is looking at one part of the process, then you're really only going to see one action you got to do. Yet when pressed to say this is correct, none of us believe it's correct. None of us believe that the memorization or the consumption of new material, whether it be you're reading a book, you're listening to a lecture, you're listening to a YouTube video, none of us believe that is learning in its entirety. But then when pressed to say, well, then what is learning? We don't have the answers, because we are, as adults, unaware of the rest of the process, as we should be, because we were never needed to be aware of it to exist as adults for a long period of time. But my argument is now society is changing in a way where we have to be aware of it now, because we're not learning. We were able to function as adults without actually learning for a long period of time. But now we can't. We have to be learning to function as adults. That is a separate thing that I won't go into right now, because then that will lead me down in a hole that I just don't want to go down right now, because the purpose of this video is to describe how our brains are not processors. If you believe that the content is the most important, the consumption of new material, new content of the thing you want to learn, so in this case, the bits and pieces of the German language or the bits and pieces of astrophysiology, if you believe that is learning, then you will also then believe that your brain is simply a processor, because then it's just a matter of consuming as much of that as you possibly can in the quickest way. And then somehow miraculously, because your brain's a processor, when it's now time to execute, to output, right, to speak German or to converse with someone in astrophysiology, whatever, your brain will organize all the shit and it'll come out. As long as you just continually consume, you will somehow process it. Doesn't work. And we all know it doesn't work, but yet we still believe our actions suggest that we believe that that's the way, yet we all know it's not the way. So one thing we have to understand is our brain is not a processor. But this belief that our brain as a processor is just it's rooted in our subconscious on such a deep level. One level that is the reason for this video is it is the underlying assumption we use, specifically people figuring out how infants learn their native language. It's an assumption they use when formulating questions for their research. So a very common question researchers ask when trying to figure out how infants can learn their native language is, how is it possible for an infant to speak correctly when there is endless possible ways of saying something, the majority of them being incorrect? How is it that an infant can come to the correct way of saying something? So this right here, this question can only exist if there's an underlying assumption that our brains are processors, that the content and the consumption of it is the most important thing, because only from that assumption does it make sense to think that infants are aware of all the possible ways of saying something, yet their brain just processes the correct way. But it doesn't make any sense. Infants are not aware of, there isn't a possibility that an infant says one of a million possible ways of speaking. That isn't a reality. An infant is only aware of a very small possible very small possible ways of saying something. It's not one, because infants don't speak correctly. Okay, so clearly it's not one, but it's not the complete opposite of infinite. Okay, it's a very small possible ways of saying something that an infant is aware of. And this is the key thing. They're all more or less accurate. They're all around the correct way. Infants never say completely ridiculous, incorrect things. But the only way for us to wrap our heads around this is we can't view our brains as a processor. Meaning we can't view learning as the act of consuming new material with the assumption that once consumed, the processor that is our brain will then churn out the correct response. It just doesn't happen that way. But the only way for us to then orient ourselves to understand how infants say the correct thing is you have to be aware of the process of learning. And so, what was I going to say? Where was I going to go with this? So I can't give you the conclusive. This is all just a work in process. That's process for me. So you're not going to come away from these videos with like everything wrapped in a nice little package. It's just not the way this process is. But I can give you my idea of what is happening. So the reason why an infant doesn't make all the possible mistakes that we can contrive of as adults is first because they're not aware of them. Okay, that's the biggest thing, is they aren't even aware of the possible mistakes they could make. So that's huge. So that's nothing. That's the line we have to kind of draw here. Because we are aware of mistakes as adults, doesn't mean our infant counterparts are aware of them. Okay. So there's something about being an adult that is qualitatively different from being an infant, and this seems to be one of those things. And whatever the learning process does, one thing it does allow us to do is contrive of or create possible realities. Okay, so it's this thing that allows us to come to a state of mind where we can conceive of alternate realities that don't currently exist. Now, obviously, that's a good thing, else we wouldn't be able to do that. So Infants don't do that. They can't do that. They can't conceive of an infinite number of alternate realities. They probably can conceive of alternate realities, but not on the scale that we can as adults. Not on the scale where we are able to ask this question, which is how, given that there's an infinite number of possibilities, how is it infants like? So there is some type of sweet spot where you are able to conceive of alternate realities, choose the correct one, or not choose the one that makes the most sense to you, given everything around you, given your circumstances, and then run with that one. That we become better and better at doing. But then there's a point where we start giving credence to just the ability to conceive of alternate realities, to the point where we start conceiving so many that it just completely confuses and warps our perspective of reality. So it's like our ability to conceive of alternate realities blinds us from reality. That infants, as they get older and older, become more like adults. They don't. The learning process ensures that that doesn't happen. So the only way for this to happen, the only way for an adult to get to that point when they are blinded from reality by their imagination of alternate realities, is they have to start learning in fake environments that don't mirror reality. So that in these little ecosystems that are not reflecting of reality, this ability to contrive of alternate realities, which infants use, but is buffered by reality, isn't buffered by reality anymore. So that it's like unleashed, and they can just do it free willy-nilly. And the only type of environments that would allow such a mind to just freely go is the classroom, okay, the university, places where there is money flowing for this type of skill to freely exist, and that's fine. But this is the problem: is we can't let that become reality, because it's not. We can't let ideas born there dictate what reality is. And so one idea born there that has dictated what we think reality is the brain is a processor. It's not. But we all believe it wholeheartedly. Whether we are aware of it or not, we believe it. The brain is not a processor. The brain processes stuff in the same way that a car plays music. Okay? So there is a purpose of the brain. And it isn't to process, it's to do something else. And processing allows that to happen more smoothly. Now, the metaphor, the parallel to the car in the music is not as well, because, I mean, we know what the purpose of the car is: to get you from point A to point B. That's it. That's the fundamental purpose of the car. Point A to point B. If cars ceased to get you from point A to point B, it would no longer be a car. So the brain is that. We need to be able to see the brain in that way too. Okay. The purpose of the brain is something, and it isn't a process. If it was, then there wouldn't be gradations of being able. Anyways, I could go down a tangent here. I'm not going to go on a tangent. It isn't a process. Why is that? Because there are different abilities of processing measured by IQ tests amongst human populations. Yet no one would say that some people's lower level brains aren't working. They're clearly still working. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The only people that would be able to say that are people that are stuck in alternate realities that believe the brain is a processor. But there wouldn't be like a general consensus of the human population to say that these brains that don't process as well as other brains are not brains. It's ridiculous. It's the same. So it's the same thing. This car that doesn't get you to point A to point B, we definitively say that's not a car anymore. It's something else. We need to have the same perspective of the brain. So the car, to get you from point A to point B, might have to have a music, It's best if it plays music. It's best if it has an AC. It's best if it has reclining seats. It's best if the seats are soft. But it's not a music player. It's not an air conditioner, and it's not a chair. Okay? Those things help it do what it's supposed to do, just like processing helps the brain do what it's supposed to do, but it isn't supposed to process. This is a distinction that we got to understand. Because if we keep thinking that if we don't really draw a line here and just understand this distinction, then we will continually believe and explore and we'll ask questions and try to answer them that are all looking at the wrong thing. We're not looking at the brain. We're looking at a part of the brain. It's like the car. I'm going back to the car. If the car stopped doing what it was supposed to do, which is get you to point A to point B, but all you could see is, say, one part of it, then the only way you're going to be able to diagnose the car is through the lens of that one part. But then the chances of the problem existing in that one part is much lower because there's so many other parts working for the car to function. It's the same thing with the brain. If all you see in the brain is something that processes, then when the brain's not functioning properly, you can't diagnose why, because your perspective is so limited, right? So this is why it's so important. And so when you finally step back and kind of see it for what it is, you start asking this interesting questions that actually go somewhere, like, well, what is the brain supposed to do? There's a question. What is the purpose of a brain? Then, in the same way that what's the purpose of the car? Then you can start asking that question. Once you wrap your head around that question, then you can start asking interesting questions like, okay, so someone isn't doing that thing the brain's designed to do. Well, why isn't it doing it? Is it the processing part of the brain that's wrong? Is it the other parts of the brain? But you can only ask those type of questions, and therefore you can only solve the problems that are actually occurring to us if you're asking those type of questions. Not those type. If you're asking if you're asking questions about the brain from the right perspective is what I want to say. So go back to the babies. This is what I often do. I often repeat myself because I don't have anyone to check me. I need to have someone to check me. So this is it. This is all I got. I don't want to keep going because I don't know if I have repeated myself or not. But I feel satisfied now. I got to get back to work now. So it's kind of how it is. Like 20 minutes, 22 minutes, right? It's not bad. I spent an hour working, and then all of a sudden this came up, and I'm like, if I just let this go again, then I'll never know how deeply important it is that I answer this question. I just spent 20 minutes trying to answer it. Maybe this will provide, if anything, it's just going to be like a piece of evidence for the world to see that I am who I say I am, right? So if I walk out and said, hey, I'm really interested in blah, 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 and they're like, I don't know who you are. I'm like, well, check this out. I'll show them this video, and they're like, oh, okay, shit, he really is. It's kind of like my portfolio now. If anything, this can serve as a portfolio, and that's awesome. So I can kind of show people this. Okay, bye.